Hello and welcome to Dropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And we're talking about The Favourite today. The new Yorgos Lanthimos film. We previously talked about The Killing of a Sacred Deer on the podcast.
Ah.
Which is by him.
Yes, I know.
And this one was not written by him. This was written by Deborah Davis and Tony McNamara. His other films, I think, have been written or co-written by him. Of his others, I've seen Killing of a Sacred Deer and The Lobster. I haven't seen Dogtooth.
No, I haven't.
It's the one that made him a name.
Yeah.
I love the other two, and first thing I'd say about this one is it's an awful lot more accessible than the two I've seen. It's more active. It's
more fun.
It's more fun. Characters are easier to relate to, and they talk an awful lot more. There's less time given to the audience to kind of ponder people's states of mind, and that sort of things, because things are kind of more constantly happening. Which is it's pleasantry, you know. It's more accessible and it's fun to watch.
It's full of great jokes.
Yeah, it's incredibly funny. So, the Favourite is based on very lightly true events. It's enormously kind of speculative and just uses its historical basis as a jumping off point to do what it wants, really.
Yes.
It's about Queen Anne's court in the early 1700s, and there's jockeying for power as her favourite, i.e. her kind of intimate companion, something that monarchs would have. So on the one hand, you've got, let me just make sure the character names.
Lady Marlborough.
Yeah, so Sarah Churchill, Lady Marlborough, played by Rachel Weisz, who is Queen Anne's existing favourite, and her cousin, who's kind of been quite downtrodden, makes her way to the palace and inveigles her way into a kind of competition with Lady Marlborough. The cousin is Abigail Hill, played by Emma Stone, and the Queen is played by Olivia Colman, wonderfully.
Yes,
it's fantastic cast.
They're all fantastic.
They are.
I would be hard placed to argue as to who was better, and I would include Nicholas Hoult, who's also fantastic.
Who plays Robert Harley?
Yes.
Who is kind of represents landed gentry that's being taxed in, and they feel overtaxed in the war with France to pay for it. Having
read biographies of all of the main characters in the film, it is based on those characters. I mean, the incidents are,
imagined.
I mean, there was a war with France, obviously, and Marlborough was involved and so on, but, this kind of really focuses on the psychology of, like, these historical personages, and kind of, in large part, it's faithful to them. I mean, Queen Anne was needy and indecisive and sentimental and depressed and, and
eccentric.
So on. The thing that's probably not accurate is, whether they had a lesbian relationship or not. Though, it is true to say that sentiment and feeling, about these two women were a driving force in the politics of the time.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that comes with being a favourite. Yes. That's the reason that a favourite is a favourite and not just a lady in waiting or a vizier or something like that. There is a more intimate relationship, but part of it is that because this all goes on behind closed doors and at very high kind of levels, you will never know the truth.
Yes. Well, there's two elements to that, right? One is feeling. Yeah, which might also be sex, but, it might not. And that the feeling then results in the political power necessary to influence affairs of state. That's what makes a favourite, right? And so that kind of sets the ground for what we see. And what's interesting about this, of course, is that it's a rare instance in English history where all of these intrigues, where women are at the center of all of these intrigues, right? So it has a queen, right? And she was only the third, I think. There's Elizabeth and Mary, and then Anne. There might have been a few.
There was Matilda, right. I think, who ruled.
Was she Queen of England, or was she just Queen of Mercia or something?
I think she ruled with King Stephen. I don't remember exactly, but she wasn't a queen on of her own right. Not entirely herself. But yeah, the point is, we haven't had many queens compared to kings.
Exactly. There are very few. And certainly even when there have been queens, the favorites have been male, right? As with Elizabeth, right? Or as indeed with Victoria. Or as indeed with Mary, right? So this is a rare instance in which kind of the favorites are women. And so that makes it kind of really intriguing and interesting. And particularly in a culture which is this film makes clear in a very humorous kind of throwaway way, which is nonetheless kind of a little bit black and bitter, right? Kind of women are really downtrodden. So, the character that Emma Stone plays is basically sold by her father, to some fat German with a thin cock, as the film tells us, in order to settle his debts, right? So kind of...
her character in particular, they have different relationships to sex, and Emma Stone's character in particular is the kind of... She is the most divorced from sex, I think, as anything romantic. She's been raped repeatedly, she makes mention at one point, and it's clear through the way that she behaves during sex and treats it that it's something that is commodified and it's used as a tool. It's used to kind of, like when she has the fight with the guy who's trying to cop off with her in the forest. She lets him come on to her in a way that's actually, it's quite a movie-ish sort of thing. She says, like, kiss me properly first, in a kind of, you think, oh, this is going to be the moment, and then she kicks him in the nuts. So like she uses it to bring him on, then kick him off, and at no point is it to her anything more than a tool of some description or other. And on the other end, you've got Queen Anne, who really is needy, and you feel kind of psychologically damaged, and she doesn't think much of herself. Right at the start, you've got Rachel Weisz telling her, "You look like a badger with that makeup on," and the way that Rachel Weisz talks to her all the time is to kind of tread her down, is to kind of keep her in a place in a way. Like you can't go over the fact that she is the queen. She's the most powerful person in the country, but if you're kind of constantly needling at her, it has a psychological effect on her. She doesn't feel that she's pretty. She doesn't feel that she's desirable or anything like that, or sexually kind of
or smart
or
anything.
Really. But in kind of sexual terms, it means that she really relies on Rachel Weisz. And
on emotional terms, I think.
Sure. That as well, but what I mean is to say that, like, she's just on the very other end. Like, to her, sex is connected to emotion, and so these things kind of clash. Rachel Weisz is more on Emma Stone's end, treating it as a tool and as something useful. And it's the way that or one of the ways in which they are able to win the Queen's favour, and kind of manipulate her. Which is quite cruel to the Queen. I mean, I felt there are some ways in which the Queen is not sympathetic, but for a lot of the time she is, and certainly in that respect she is. She's nothing but a victim emotionally.
I mean, in a way, I think the triumph of this film for me is, well, first, it is really, I found it hilariously funny. And yet I also found it very moving. There were moments where it just moved me. And actually those were all Olivia Cole moments, really. Colman. So, I was also profoundly moved. And I think I was profoundly moved by substance, that kind of, these characters are very complex because you can understand all of them, right? So, Emma Stone, what she wants is to create a situation where she's safe, right? She's had so much go on in her life that what she really wants is security, and kind of almost all her actions are kind of done in order to achieve it. And you can understand, And at the same time, I admire that she's so smart that she can, and daring, actually, because she takes quite a lot of chances, and with great danger. I mean, we see her kind of, being beaten.
For having walked in on the Queen. She lies her way into the Queen's quarters, knowing that she can help out her bruised and sore legs with this ointment that she's created. And then when she's sort of discovered and beaten, but it's the risk that she's taken that then means that she wins the favour of the Queen, because the Queen goes, "Oh, thank you very much. It worked."
And we also understand Sarah Churchill, because, she's really smart. I mean, had she not been a woman, she would have been, the head minister. And often we see her in men's clothes, kind of shooting and riding and so on. And really kind of, you get the feeling that what she wants is to be right? That, she's got the mind of a brilliant person and can't quite exercise it except, through the queen, right? So you also understand her, or I understand her character. And also, you really get the feeling that she's also, very considerably in love with her husband, right? And that is a kind of a different relationship than what we see with Emma Stone or what we see with the Queen. So I feel you understand her. And she's also kind of very nonsensical, very driven, and also cruel, because one of the things that sets the relationships at the very beginning between the two women, between Sarah Churchill and what's Emma Stone's character?
Abigail.
Abigail, is that Sarah treats Abigail very badly, because, in those days, if a cousin shows up, then actually your job is to protect her and make her feel at home instead of sending her as a scullery maid to the kitchen. Right? I mean, to be a cousin is to be family, right? And so Abigail is really ditched by her.
Yeah.
So there are all these dynamics that the film puts into play, that have texture and certainly are beautifully dramatized, and kind of are very beautifully rendered comic as well. Yeah. So there's all these things happening in the film at the same time, which I think is really kind of quite astonishing.
Yeah, the film's got a really incredible sense of humour. It's sensible. I can't exactly figure out exactly how to place it. Like it's not surreal exactly. There are no real kind of flights of fancy, but there are incongruities. Remember when we were talking about the Phantom Thread and how funny it was when he's lying ill in bed and he tells the doctor to fuck off.
Yes.
And then Alma pops her head into frame and says, "Well, I think it's clear he wants you to fuck off," and it just doesn't fit the time, and it's done with this kind of lightness of touch that's very funny. There's a lot of that in this. There's a lot of bad language. The word cunt comes out 6 or 7 times.
Yes.
And
yes, if you expect a normal, sweet, safe, historical drama, this is not it.
No, exactly. But it's also not done. It's not done in a kind of.
It's not vulgar.
It's just the occasional vulgarity, the occasional swear word does crop up, and how to put it, like,
and shocks a bit and startles.
Yeah, and has a comic effect for being
surprises.
Out of
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I was also thinking throughout this film, because my first thought when thinking about Yorgos Lanthimos films is surreal, right? And certainly I thought The Lobster had those elements.
Oh, yeah.
But this one does not. The humor comes from the unexpected, really, and also from questions of tone. Yeah, the kind of, the humor is really quite black, and it could be perceived as harsh, except it's not, right? So, for example, there's a scene where Sarah Churchill has been beaten up, right, and she wakes up and talks to this woman, and you realize that, she's in a whorehouse. She's been locked up in a whorehouse, right? And that kind of there's someone fucking someone else of indeterminate gender just by the window. And actually, just the incongruity of that is just funny, right? Like, kind of, that's not what you'd expect,
Yeah.
And actually, even if you expect to see her wake up in bed with a scar, you wouldn't expect, with the camera to reveal just casual sex happening on the side. Yeah, the incongruities of it are just really well judged and really well timed, and also kind of revealing. Yeah, so it's humor that comes out of context. It's not just a banana slipping on a banana.
Yeah. Well, in the setting, there's a kind of combination of the realistic and the comic. So, if you compare it to something like The Lobster, which is set in a very different kind of sci-fi world, this isn't that at all. The kind of the set design is fabulous and so rich, and these places, these rooms, they all look like they would in any other period drama. But it's what's happening within them, just the way things are set up, that is a little bit different, or a little bit, or the way that people react to each other when they're in there. I mean, even the thing about it in the whorehouse, the people fucking in the corner, is probably not too unrealistic, but it's just sort of, because it's there presented for you, like that's the incongruity. The way that, for instance, you have the Queen's rabbits in her room. Yes. She's got these 17 rabbits, and they let them out early on, and they're kind of hopping around the place. And again, like, on a kind of logical level, it's perfectly reasonable you would let your pets out and have them running around, but then the effect that it has on the scenes when kind of more serious stuff is happening and there's kind of political intrigue and these power games, and there's a rabbit hopping around in the background chasing another one.
Yes.
It's that juxtaposition has a comic effect, rather like in Bad Lieutenant, the Werner Herzog version, where it's this story of this drug addict cop, but he's forced to cart a Labrador around with him the whole time. This is the happiest dog in the world, and it just sets off all the scenes in a really weird way.
Yes, I think this humor is also quite harsh. So, for example, the scene that comes to mind is when Harley is talking to Abigail, and he's trying to convince her to work for him and spy for him, and she doesn't. And at a certain point, he just pushes her into a ditch, right? And again, it's so startling and dark, right? And kind of brutish, and yet funny, right?
Yeah.
And I think part of the darkness of the film is, or part of the harsh acts that the film shows, but which actually don't tilt over into darkness. Like, the film always remains in a, in a realist light vein. Yeah, it's kind of. I think part of the reason for that is just a matter of fact that all of the characters think this is what life is like. Life is harsh. Yeah, and they treat it very matter of fact, actually. But fight it, yeah, or kind of respond to it. And I thought that push kind of was an emblem of that. For me, the comparison is with what's his name, Delaclos. What's the name? The Dangerous Liaisons. The Stephen Frears film, but also Valmont, the Milos Forman film. I think there was also Cruel Intentions, was a teen remake of it, yeah? These people who kind of use sex, as a game, yeah? Except in this, it's not a game. It's actually, like, essential to the achievement of those goals, for which one of the people is absolute survival, yeah?
Pierre Chodelot de Laclos.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, Google's much better than my memory.
An 18th century novelist.
But it was remade into like several famous films, 2 big hits.
Yeah.
And this has that same kind of sexual machination to achieve what you want.
Yeah.
And and sex is a game and an element of self-confidence. So the Rachel Weisz character is very self-confident. She can get the queen she can get the queen to do what she wants on the basis of the queen's affection for her. Right? And that's kind of what Abigail aims to replace her with, but she never quite achieves the extent of what the Rachel Weisz character had. And, kind of, I think the queen just wants affection. I think it's very interesting because you see all the characters, particularly the Abigail character, suffer such terrible things. And, what turns the queen around is her being cruel to a rabbit.
Yeah, well, the queen is linked to the rabbits very early on. So there's cinematography, which I think we should come back to.
We should come back to, yes.
That uses very wide angle shots and at 7 or 8 points, fisheye lenses. And in the Queen's chambers, I found it has this effect of making her feel like an animal in a cage. She's very often left alone there in this enormously ornate, huge room, but she has nothing to do. She can't move a lot of the time, so her leg hurts. When she does walk around, she has this very awkward, limping gait to her. So she's kind of a prisoner in this room, and all her rabbits at the start are in cages.
She's always gazing out of windows. Yeah. Like as in a prison, really.
Yeah, absolutely. She's also linked to the rabbits when she explains that each one essentially represents a child that she lost, whether it was stillborn or died in infancy. She lost 17 children, and she has these 17 rabbits. That's explained in dialogue, so it's very clearly linked. And so you do get this, and that's also when Emma Stone and she connect for the first time.
Yes.
It's when Emma Stone is sent to the Queen's chambers to play whist with her because Rachel Weisz has more important things to be doing. She's getting on with running the country.
Yes.
Because that's the job she's given herself. And the Queen doesn't want her there. And it's when Emma Stone takes an interest in the rabbits and gets them out and shows love for them. Those two connect. So the Queen is very much connected to these things, and it's right at the end of the film. The Queen's lying in bed, and Emma Stone's just reading a book, and she puts her heel. She starts standing and applying pressure to one of the rabbits under her foot.
Cruel.
It's incredibly cruel. The rabbit starts whimpering, and so Queen Anne can hear it. She responds to the whimpering, but there is a sense of a kind of. To me, it felt like a telepathic connection,
Nice.
like kind of magical sort of twins. It's like my twin gets hurt and I feel it too, sort of thing. It felt like a telepathic connection where it's like when the rabbit is in pain, it has a physical effect on the Queen.
For me, that moment is characteristic of many things. But one I want to underline here is the way that the film distributes knowledges, So that's a moment where we know that the Queen saw, what Abigail was doing. It's also a moment of transformation with Abigail, because actually we've never seen Abigail be just senselessly cruel until that moment. So actually this process of her getting safe has also made her cruel, right? It is a moment of transformation. But also we know that the Queen saw, but Emma doesn't know, and actually will not know that's what the Queen saw, right? And the film trades on these disparities of knowledge, of who knows what when, right? Kind of to make the drama kind of move along. It's really, really very well done, I think.
And there's also, I think, a hierarchical thing going on there, in terms of kind of exercising your status or trying to exercise it and trying to gain it by exercising it. And if you get away with it, you've proved that you are worthy of a certain status in a way. And it's done visually through people or things being above and below each other. Right from the very beginning of the film, although it does tail off, there's a visual design of shots being held from very, very low and pointing up, like incredibly sort of strikingly and expressively, and it's exaggerated. These shots are, you see at people's nostrils practically. The shots are so far below. It's really emphasised these kind of the power. Like it's like fucking Stonehenge. These people standing over you, looking at each other.
The film is incredibly original visually.
And so what happens right at the end, it has tailed off by this point, that particular thing, but the idea of being above and below, I think, continues. So you've got the rabbit underneath Emma Stone's foot being crushed, and the Queen notices, and to punish her, she stands up and tells Emma Stone to rub her legs, which is something she's been doing throughout the film to help her. And so it's Emma Stone who ends up on her knees, looking up at the Queen. Yes. Well, not even looking up, the camera looks up, but Emma Stone's just looking forward, hating where she's, because the Queen has asserted her power.
Yes.
And then it fades over with these images of the rabbits and the film ends.
Yes.
I didn't quite know what to make of that at first, but I've kind of...
Yes, I'm not sure what to make of that as well, but though, I think it's a great ending. Yeah, and actually, not... So, there are some things that come across very clearly, right? The Queen regaining her power. Yeah, kind of Emma Stone being crushed, the image of these rabid children kind of overtaking kind of the image. Also, that this is a moment where she might be dying, right? Like, so kind of some things come across very clearly. When you try to pin this image means X, actually that's not so clear, yeah? But some things are clear, right? So this reversal of power is absolutely clear, right? So, and I think
reassertion, I would put it as. I think the Queen never kind of lost her power, but she, by the end of the
film...
Not
in relation to Abigail, but I think very much in relation to Rachel Weisz, So, and that's what happens. One of the things I want to mention is that the film also trades very much on, an English tradition of not saying what you mean, or of pointedly saying one thing but really meaning another. And actually, I think what this film does that's so interesting is it uses that mode of communicating, and then it translates it for you, right? Okay. So, you remember the exchanges. Emma Stone and Rachel Weisz are continuously having these exchanges, right? Where something is highly coded, and then the other one will say, so, this means that, you're going to screw me if I do this.
There are a couple of points where someone will just explain that the point where Rachel Weisz says, I'm going to use these letters if I don't get my way, could not be clearer.
That could not be clearer.
And there are one or two other points, but the points where it is left as coded threats, are very nice. I'm thinking particularly of the one where the two of them are shooting. Emma Stone and Rachel Weisz are out shooting.
Which is a continuous image. So it's a scene that we continuously return to.
Yeah.
Right? And actually part of the process of the film is that, towards the end, Abigail has become as good a shot as Sarah, who taught her to shoot. So actually, how they're shooting is also part of the way that the film is communicating where they're at in relation to each other.
Yeah. And the shooting scene I'm particularly thinking about in terms of kind of coded language is the one in which Abigail, in code, reveals to Lady Marlborough that she knows she and the Queen are having a sexual relationship.
Yes.
It's not that coded, and she said she refers to it as her biggest secret. Your secret is safe for me, including your biggest secret, and that's when she makes it clear. And then there's this thing of Lady Marlborough fires the gun at her, and then says, "Oh, well, there was no pellet in here this time, but you've got to be careful because maybe there could be in future."
Yes.
And it's not. There's an element in which that's kind of particularly English, the idea of being coded, but that's threat stuff that you've seen before in a lot of places. It's very entertaining.
Yes. That's not quite what I was referring to. I was referring more to things like, the conversations in the hallway where one character says to another something like, I would be kind of very grateful, blah, blah. And you want me to spy on you, right? So, the kind of dialogue makes these constant translations where something is kind of, coded so as to disavow it. And then the character makes it clear. The person speaking makes it clear.
Okay.
Which I thought was kind
maybe didn't notice that as much as you did.
I found that kind of very, very, very interesting because, I was just wondering, because it's such an English way of speaking, of either misdirection or exaggeration or not quite saying what you mean or saying something else that the words themselves don't indicate. And then it might be like, a foreigner's kind of attitude to actually immediately, want the translation of those things. There is that thing that goes on.
Well, it's certainly a comic idea. I mean, like I say, I didn't notice this clearly as much as you did, so I'm saying it more as something speculative rather than as something I noticed. But the idea of having characters speaking in a coded way and then immediately explain exactly what they're saying literally that's a comic idea.
Yeah.
So they're speaking one way for a reason, but we're just going to ignore it straight away.
No,
so,
I think that's true.
Yeah.
It's certainly very funny. I want to talk about the images, because I think this is such an original film visually because, it's kind of a mainstream film. It's, it's kind of, even the budget by British standards is a mainstream budget. So, to make a film that is almost entirely in wide angles, extreme wide angles.
$15 million, the budget, 1.5.
Yeah, so, so extreme wide angles or fisheye lenses is really quite extraordinary because it is kind of very jarring and distortive initially to kind of see, a film that is almost entirely skewed, right? And sometimes slightly out of focus, in fact.
The film is shot by the cinematographer is Robbie Ryan.
Yes.
Who's an Irish cinematographer who's worked a lot with Andrea Arnold.
Right.
So he did Red Road, Fish Tank, Wuthering Heights, American Honey.
Okay.
He also did Philomena. He did I, Daniel Blake.
So nothing like this before.
I think maybe the likes of the Andrea Arnold stuff might be a little bit. I mean, also she shoots particularly in full frame.
Well, the Andrea Arnold is certainly much more experimental than the Stephen Frears, but what I remember from Wuthering Heights and so on is a kind of almost like extreme realism, really.
Yeah.
So this is different. At least,
this is
all the films that I've seen.
Of an extreme.
Yeah, and these are extraordinarily extreme wide angles or fisheye lenses. That's the style of the film. If you want to take an archetypal image from this film, it would be one of those. And yet, it's used selectively. So actually, the film is very interesting as to when it's showing those extraordinarily wide angles, or when it becomes kind of normal frame and almost eye level, right? So often you'll see Emma Stone, when she's alone, she'll be shot kind of almost normally, right? When she's in some kind of emotional distress or situation, yeah, she'll be walking through a corridor and kind of the whole thing will be skewed. There are extraordinary images at the end of Rachel Weisz using the lover's corridor that connects her to the Queen's bedchamber and being rejected, and when she comes out, it's almost like the wide angle lens makes her face almost like the center of a rectangle. Yeah. So everything around her is skewed, but her face in the light, and dark actually, but her face in the light kind of, remains at that center of which everything kind of becomes extreme. And I thought that was amazing. Those are like very vivid and memorable and expressive shots.
Yeah, and I like the way that the shots emphasize depth as well. I think there's a feeling that you get, although I don't think it's necessarily normal actually, but there's certainly a feeling that you get when you imagine the way that period films look, that you imagine them being kind of very long lenses, very flat images, kind of painterly, like trying to look like oil paintings. And actually I haven't got enough of a real sense of actually what they're like to say that that's genuinely true, but I think it's something you expect. In this, it's not what you get at all, and the film, I think, plays to that. The film really emphasises depth. It puts people in the foreground. It makes people feel very physical, and I think the film also has an enormous emphasis on touch and physicality, and you notice people touching each other, kisses and touches and kind of rubbing legs. These are all very important. The dancing, the way that people move as well. I mean, the way that Olivia Colman walks, with this, like I said, this very awkward gait, this kind of limpy, kind of grasping onto walls to keep her balance at some points. Impossible to ignore the way that people move in this. And when you think of those kind of classic period drama sort of dance sequences where people will be in kind of great halls dancing with each other, and they're all kind of very well orchestrated and everyone knows the steps and that sort of thing. There's a kind of similar emphasis on movement and noticing how people, there's space between them, then they move together, then they move apart. I'm not talking about dancing, I'm talking about everything.
Yes.
Like you will notice the way that people kind of move apart and come together in argument scenes.
There are two brilliant comic moments of dancing, which is actually where that traditional dancing that you expect in a kind of, an 18th, 17th, 18th century period piece, all of a sudden becomes kind of rap floor dancing, right? Like,
the music remains sort of court music from the time, but the dancing, all of a sudden he picks her up and starts swinging around.
Yeah, and also he goes on the floor and does,
that's right.
Gymnastics.
But his face remains dispassionate.
Yeah,
in that way.
But it gets her so annoyed she puts a stop to it, right? So the whole thing is like, actually, that was where you get, one joke on top of another joke on top of another joke.
I think the reason that she got annoyed in that scene, the Queen, is because she's realised, I think the dance scene is making her realise that this is the first time she realised that Rachel Weisz is really trying to take control of what she's doing. Because Rachel Weisz behind her back is saying, we're going to put up all these taxes on the landowners.
Yes.
And then Nicholas Hoult has said to the Queen, now that he's finally got a chance to speak to her,
but that moment...
I disagree with these taxes. And so then going off and watching this dance, she's like, this power's been taken away from me.
But it's not just that, it's a moment of sexual jealousy. She's dancing with this guy and they're getting off on the dancing and she's jealous. So there's all of that, plus the jealousy.
I didn't see that. I certainly didn't see them getting off.
No, but they're getting off on the dancing with each other. Yes, they are. They're kind of responding to each of the movements. They're having fun, kind of making odd movements. They're dancing with each other. And it makes the Queen jealous. And actually, that's the moment where she says, no, there will be no rise, right?
Yeah.
But it's driven by jealousy in that moment. Anyway.
There's certainly, I'd certainly see there's a level of jealousy in them being able to move freely as they do. Because the Queen is so unable to. She's so physically impaired.
Yes.
She's confined to this wheelchair.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think it's more than that. Anyway, my point was, that the film does go off on flights.
Yeah.
Right? So kind of tonally, it's kind of, there's a consistency to it. But then, so when we said earlier that, this film wasn't surrealist like The Lobster, and yet it has these moments where it goes someplace completely unexpected that could risk rupturing, the world of the film. Yeah.
The film maintains a tone that is light and kooky enough, quirky, if you like, that it means that it doesn't risk breaking itself when it does want to do these things. Because still the way that people are behaving with each other and just the manner in which sort of sex is I guess you kind of imagine these courts and these palaces as fairly dry, they're places of business almost. That's just what you would sort of imagine them as, and of course in this film, sex is on the table all the time. People are always talking about, people are always wanting to do it. You kind of assume that everyone's trying to fuck someone in this. And so that immediately kind of changes the tenor of the entire thing.
Yes.
Like the fact that sex, and it's something kind of something that you just don't talk about, something that you don't really associate with anything, is so kind of constantly in the air.
Yes. And there's not a sexy moment in the film. Actually, I think it's worth underlining. So it's a film that's that's obsessed with sex, and it's obsessed with sex in almost every guise except just pure pleasure.
Yeah, it is something that's done, as we say, as a tool, something that's used. It's not that there's not titillating moments in the film.
No, then there's a lot of comic moments like, Abigail's wedding night.
Yeah.
Which is, forceful, determined, funny, everything but sexy.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole thing with her husband. It's like he's kind of constantly coming on to her and she's constantly putting him off. And so when it comes to the wedding night, he basically says, like, would you fucking please come and wank me off? And so she does, but she's obsessed with what's going on with the Queen, with Rachel Weisz. So
she's plotting.
She's not looking at it. She, in fact, he's behind her when she's doing it. She's basically not there at all. It's purely mechanical.
Yeah.
And it's great. He in the background, out of focus, trying to get off. It's really good. One thing I liked as well is the idea that you get these servants who are just sort of stood around the place. These various kind of handmaidens and guards and what have you, and there is an idea of sort of living in open secrecy. Like, no one should know about Rachel Weisz and the Queen. No one should know about Emma Stone and the Queen.
Yes.
But they have to, right? There are people stood around all the time.
Yes.
These things can't be complete secrets. And yet, like, they can get on with what they're doing, kind of knowing that these people will just keep their secrets. It's weird. Like, the servants around them kind of exist but don't.
Well, but it happens on every level. And actually, I thought that was one of the interesting things about the film, that everything happens on every level. So, for example, the opening scenes in the servants' quarters, you see the servants being as competitive and nasty and, plotting and, kind of somebody, changes her bucket so that she puts her hands in pure lye and almost destroys them, right? So, this idea of this Manichaean world is kind of cuts through the classes. It's not a place where just because you're poor, you're sweet. Huh.
No. An interesting movie. Fun movie.
Yes.
And I would full of fantastic performances.
Yes.
I mean, it's great. People can't pick their favourite out of Olivia Colman and Rachel Weisz and Emma Stone. You'll get, the conversation sort of on Twitter and whatnot is incredibly laudatory about all three of them.
Yeah.
But you get people going, Olivia Colman was the best. Oh no, Rachel Weisz was the best. Like, people have picked what they like. For me, I like Olivia Colman the most. I think she's
like
really
Olivia.
Sympathetic and really subtle. And also when the Queen is kind of starting to really degenerate later in the film and half her face seems to have been paralysed.
Yes.
It's beautifully performed.
Olivia Colman is amazing. And part of the reason why I think she is, to me, the central performance in the film is because she's moving with it, so kind of, she makes you understand this person and feel for her and feel for her situation. And it's someone who's both comic and regal, and also you understand her loneliness and her sadness and her suicidalness, and kind of you get a sense of what a harsh, life she's led and how inadequate to the job she is. And actually, you have all of these things, and you still feel for her. She makes you feel for her. Which I think is quite something.
Interestingly, she's certainly the heart of the film, and she's probably the only character you can really feel compassion for.
Yes.
You were saying, I think about Aquaman. You were talking about how kind of obsessed we seem to be these days with stories about royals and kind of bloodlines, things like that. Do you think this kind of functions as a counterpoint, or one?
I do actually.
Despite the fact that the Queen in this is the heart of the film.
Well, you see, I think it's a very interesting film because you could imagine how in England, in Britain, actually, how there might be people who might make films that are completely obsequious to royalty. And you could also imagine films that really poke fun at it and kind of deride it, right? But actually, this is a film which, in a way, has no time for monarchy, right? It kind of, it is all about kind of power relations and so on. But actually, where the person who you're most sympathetic to, who you're made to be most sympathetic to, is actually the Queen, right? And part of the reason why you're made to see her as the most sympathetic character is because, she's an ordinary person with problems and feelings, and she's not on the make, and she is kind, and she is good, she's not very intelligent, and so on, but that doesn't mean that she doesn't have a right to, be loved or, be understood. So it's kind of like an interesting paradox, really.
Yeah, because she does have all the power. She's the Queen. It's her God-given right.
Yes.
She's anointed by God, but and you feel bad because the way her power's kind of been taken away from her. But I suppose it's not that she's having power taken away from it. It's the fact that she's being used so transparently. That's where you feel for her.
That is where you feel for her.
It's a subtle,
but also you feel her you feel her sadness over her children. You feel her love for her rabbits. Why shouldn't they be important? Right? You do understand why she's kind of driven almost to suicide. You also feel that no one loves her. No one is putting her first, except they all want something from her. So of course she is first in some ways, but no one is putting her first empathetically as a human being, right? So the film makes you understand all of that. And it's very, very different than films like The Queen or The Madness of King George or, all of those films, which are really arch in some ways,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's certainly... It's interesting because I think a word that is very easy to use about the favourite is irreverent.
Yes.
It has no reverence for anything. But at the same time, as you say, like, the Queen Anne is the character who I think you can most easily respect.
Yes.
In it, or kind of find something to like in. Which is interesting.
Yes. So I want to and this is just a game, right? But, I think what Olivia Colman brings is she makes you sympathize and feel. I think at the other extreme, and I think almost as great, is Nicholas Hoult, because he's purely a comic figure. Right, but he's a comic figure. He's not the butt of the joke, right? He's just a comic figure. So he's got lots of power, and he's really intelligent, and he can maneuver and so on. And he's got kind of like this harshness, right? And also this foppishness. It's a real wild performance. I think he's great, right? So, but he's in many ways completely superficial. Yeah, he's all about power, and then kind of the two women at the center, which are Abigail and Sarah, and again, two really great performances from Rachel Weisz and Emma Stone. But they're also more traditional performances, I think, actually. I think what Nicholas Hoult is doing is very daring, right? Okay. And the director makes a lot of visual jokes out of both Olivia Colman and Nicholas Hoult that he doesn't of the two women.
How so?
Well, for example, just the look of Nicholas Hoult, right?
The
wig and the painted lips, and right, and also the contrast sometimes when he's saying something and then you see him with those little lips, but also the harshness. He's meant to be a cruel figure, right? All the throwing, what was it, oranges or tomatoes at the naked man?
Yeah, both,
right?
I think.
Yeah, and of course, the joke of Olivia Colman with her badger look. And it really is a badger look, and it's filmed to be funny, right? Right? Like, very extreme, right? You don't get, or I don't remember any of that type of visual joke with...
The looks of Rachel Weisz and Emma Stone are not made fun of. Anyway, there is a thing about how sort of the guys, it's the men in this world who wear makeup.
Yes.
More than the women.
That's right.
She has a joke at one point about him smearing his mascara.
Yes.
That's right. It's Rachel Weisz sort of teasing him about the fact that he can't get his way over the land tax. And she says, "Don't smear your mascara," by crying.
Yes.
I think the other thing is though that the male actors in the film are kind of, how to put it, kind of know their place in a way. Like there's no danger of their characters taking over any kind of real attention. It always comes back to the three central female characters and the way that they're going to respond to everything.
Well, for sure. I mean,
they're more peripheral.
Yeah.
It's not to say they're not important, but
No.
They're not scene stealers either.
No, except, so there's no question that the film is a triangle, right? And the triangle are all the women. And the triangle is one for power, really. However, within that, I think, so we were talking about, in a way, the quality of performance rather than, its importance to the narrative or its length. And I think Nicholas Hoult gives an extraordinarily daring performance. I mean, he's a young Hollywood star, and he's basically kind of doing nasty restoration comedy, in this film. It's really quite amazing, I think.
I'd maybe have to watch it again to really see what you mean about that. I didn't think he was bad or anything. But he didn't strike me as extraordinary or taking kind of vast risks. Oh. I mean, I thought that really the risk I thought in terms of performance would have been was Olivia Colman to me. I mean, she lets herself look so sort of unpleasant to look at by the end when she's deteriorating.
Okay, and not to take anything away from that, because she is completely great.
Yeah.
But you expect a middle-aged character actress to be as free about her looks as Olivia Colman is. You don't expect a young Hollywood leading man, to be as free with his looks as he's allowed to be in this film, right? And to be made such fun of, and to be feminized in those ways. I think it's a very daring performance.
Fair enough.
Anyway,
and I won't even say agree to disagree, because I don't disagree. I just would need to see it again.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, that said, what I want to underline is, well, first I highly recommend it, but I actually want to underline that it's a really funny film, right? And that if you don't go expecting to see a traditional, historical drama or period drama, you will enjoy it very much. It's really kind of original. It's really, really funny.
Yeah, you should neither expect to see a traditional period drama, nor should you expect to see a traditional Yorgos Lanthimos film, because, as we say, it doesn't operate in quite that same register as his previous couple.
Yes, I think
it's much lighter, much more active, and much more accessible, and I think it's to its benefit.
I think it brings out the best of both genres, unless you're only going for it to see the palaces. Because in this one, the palaces are all warped. Though actually, it has some beautiful locations as well.
The set design is fantastic. I don't know how much of it was shot on location or sets, but either way, the visual design is extraordinary. It's beautiful.
But it's not focusing on visual pleasure. I mean, the visuals are conveying something else.
Yeah.
It's not just look at this great ceiling. Though I did feel that way sometimes. Like, look at this great ceiling and then warp.
I remember just one shot of Olivia Colman being stuck in her room. I think I alluded to that sort of thing earlier. She feels like she's trapped, and it's her chambers, it's her bedroom, and the room that she's in is just so grand. And at that point, she's very small in the centre of frame, and the wide angle privileges all of the walls and all the ceiling, and it's just covered in gold. There isn't a single inch that isn't covered in some gold, a gold leaf or something embroidered with gold, and it's extraordinary to look at on its own terms. But of course, then it's communicating the way that she's just confined within riches. Like, I have all this stuff and I cannot breathe.
Yes.
She seems to say.
Pretend it's chocolate. All right.
All right then.
Thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and
we're on iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube to listen to. And you must subscribe to the YouTube channel, because if I get 1,000 subscribers, then I can start monetizing it.
All right. And how many hundreds do we have left to go?
I think we have 7 so far. On social media, we're on Facebook and on Twitter. We're at Eavesdrop Movies, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Okay, thank you very much for listening.
Bye bye.